Hello, my name is Sarah Sally Hamer, and I am filming this as an adjunct to the WITS blog, the Writers in the Storm blog, that will be up on July the 13th, 2026, and will be available for you to watch it if you'd like. So, we're going to talk about point of view today. We want to talk about the difference between global and scene point of view, which may not be what you normally think of as point of view. Point of view, is defined as being first person or third person or second person. They use that in different aspects, or omniscient or limited or deep or all of these different terms. But that's the only way. There are actually three ways of talking about point of view. And the last two, the global and the scene, are the two that we're going to discuss today. Well, most point of view problems happen because writers don't realize they're actually making mistakes or having problems or making different point of view decisions. So by the end of this little workshop, I intend that you should be able to understand the difference between those three different points of view. So the one where you define first person as opposed to third person. The second one is to being global, and the third to have it be scene by scene. So most writers think that POV is only one decision. Well, it isn't. Because if once, and we're going to put away the first person, third person. We're not going to discuss that in this. We're going to only discuss these two separate decisions, which is number one, who owns the story, which is the global point of view. And number two, the scene point of view, which is who owns this scene. Because confusing this is really one of the hard things. Now, don't get me wrong. Different people use different point of views for different reasons, and there's no real incorrect way to do it. But I'm a point of view purist, and so I'm going to give you the absolute, what I think is the correct way of doing it, and then you choose. See how it works for you. See if it makes your writing stronger, or if it makes your writing give you shivers down your back, because we don't want that to happen either. So, global point of view is the big picture. It's about who owns the story. It's a big picture decision. We're doing it across the entire book, story, movie, whatever it is that you're writing. It's usually stable. It very rarely changes. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have like Martin, who wrote the Game of Thrones. He changes point of view every chapter. He creates that. So every character has a point of view that is in a linear fashion, starting at the beginning and going all the way through. He stops the point of view for one character and starts the next one with that character's name at the beginning. Then, when he's done with that character and has covered that piece of information, he stops there and he starts with another character and goes forward, which is a good way of doing it. Obviously, it didn't hurt him any, but it's usually stable in that you pick a point of view character and you carry them all the way through the movie or the book. And it also determines your emotional core as to who the reader cares about. You give the reader a character, you immerse the reader in that character's understanding of the story. And then the character falls in love or falls into hate or whatever it is that you're trying for, we hope, what you're trying for. But it works all the way through with that emotional core with a particular character. But when we're doing a scene point of view, it's who owns the scene. And that means that you can have multiple characters in a book that have a scene and have a point of view. But we try to make it be where each scene only has one point of view character, one character who is carrying that story. And this is a moment by moment decision. You may go give someone 10 paragraphs or 3 scenes or 2 chapters before you change your point of view and go to a different character. And that can be done. There are ways to do it, but that work, technically work. But this determines your reader experience. They're going to understand more about what's going on in the book. They're going to be able to get closer to the characters. because it determines the reader experience. So your novel can have one story owner, but many scene owners, if that's what you want. Again, it's not set in concrete. It's just how it works. So, global point of view. Well, who owns your story? Who is the character that would not survive? The character for whom the book would not survive if you remove that character. It's not necessarily who appears first. It's not necessarily who talks most. It's not who is the coolest character in the book. Instead, it's who changes the most in the book, who has the greatest stake, and whose problem is this story really about. Because if you remove that character, you have to determine, is the story going to survive? And I'm going to talk a lot about different stories here in just a minute and go through this and explain. But the bottom line is we experience that character through their thoughts, because that's what we're looking for, is the depth of character to be able to. Okay, there are 4 different ways really to be able to express your characters. One is through their description, physical. One is through their action. One is through their behavior, and one is through their thoughts. Only the point of view character gets to think in a story. So here's our example number 1. The Hunger Games. Who owns the Hunger Games? All the way through the books. It doesn't work that way in the movies. They had to change it to be able to find out what other characters were thinking and doing, because Katniss could only give you what she experienced herself. So the story owner, of course, is Katniss. Why? It's because she's the one who's going to die. She's the one who's trying to save her family. And the story actually follows her transformation all the way through. The climax depends on her decisions, because if you remove Katniss, it's a different story. It doesn't mean the other characters don't matter. Of course they do. But they're not the ones who the story is wrapped around. If they were, it would be the Hunger Games starring Peeta, or the Hunger Games starring President Snow, which we do see later, don't we? We go back after those original 3 stories. She went, I can't think of her name right this minute. You know who it is. Susan, no, that's not right. I'm not even going to try. But the writer went back and wrote a story about Snow and gave him at least partially his own point of view. So it means that we follow these stories, and the emotional transformation in the Hunger Games belongs to Katniss. So the next one is the Lord of the Rings. Now, in the Lord of the Rings, there are lots of different characters, and it's really not a pure point of view, one character, global one character point of view, because there's lots of them. But who carries the central burden? Of course, it's Frodo. And the emotional spine of that story revolves around whether Frodo succeeds. Now, point of view changes in these series of books are important, because what Tolkien is doing is he's pulling the information that he needs to tell the story. So when the different characters show up, when they are needed for a particular thing, then that becomes the point of view character. But the bottom line is the central story is Frodo taking that ring to Mordor and throwing it in the volcano. And of course he survives, and we also fall share, right? So how do we identify this global point of view? We ask 4 questions. Whose life changes the most? Who has the most to lose? We just said that. Who drives the climax? And whose victory or failure matters the most? And the answer to all 4 questions most of the time is the same character. That's the one that we want to have win. And once you know this story, once you know how this works, once you know who your main character is, a lot of structural decisions are easier, because you don't have to be fighting about which character is the main one that you want to run against. So scene POV on the other side is a completely different decision, because now we get to zoom in. Now we get to actually ask, not just who owns the story, but who's experiencing this particular moment. Sometimes it is the one owning the story. And in the Susan Collins, I did get it, Hunger Games, he has Katniss being the one who experiences every moment. They did the same thing in Gone with the Wind, especially in the movie. If you ever watch the where they have the scenes, you can go watch the director's cut and things like that, where they talk about it. And they have where every scene that is written up on a board back in that time period. It's probably a blackboard. They didn't have whiteboards back when that was being filmed in 1938, 39. So what they did was they would write the different people's names and what costume they should be in and what the location was and what time it started. And Vivian Lee's name was on almost every single one of those whiteboards. Excuse me, blackboards. So who is experiencing this moment? That's who is in charge. That's who owns the scene. So the story can have one owner, being Scarlett O'Hara, but that you can have multiple scene POV characters if that's the way your story needs to work. So the way the scenes work is that you want to identify that that scene, who is in charge of that particular scene. So we have one scene is in one mind. Now, again, this is not set in concrete, but it makes sense to me because it makes it so I stay in the story. People do it this way. I'm reading through a story. I read a lot of books, both published and non-published as I'm editing. And I get to a place where someone changes who's in charge of the scene, who owns the scene in the middle of one. It pulls me out of the story. Now, that's not a disaster, but it pulls me out to the point where I have to reorient myself back into the understanding of what that scene is. So readers should always know whose eyes they're using, who's the character, whose emotions they're feeling, because I'm feeling those emotions right along with the character. Otherwise, I'm not interested in the book. And whose assumptions that those characters are living within that I need to be living within also. So think one character, one camera, one mind. So why head hopping matters? So what is head hopping? It's when you're the book has within a scene or even across scenes goes from one character to another without the reader being able to follow it easily, because it ends up, as it says at the bottom of the slide, that it's reader confusion. So writers become curious, and we're thinking, we're wanting to make sure that we're giving the reader the best experience we can, right? So what's Susie feeling? What's Joe thinking? What's Karen hiding? And they put it all into the same scene with each one of those characters being able to express that through thoughts. And the result is reader confusion. Certainly confuses me. So that's why we want to choose the scene owner, figure out who wants something most in this scene, and then ask who has the most to lose. And that should be, usually is, your POV character. Step 2, enter the scene through that character. Don't begin with a neutral camera. Begin with experience. Now, again, depends on the book. But think about this. Instead of the conference room was crowded, how about instead Mason squeezed into the last open chair and wished he'd arrived earlier? Well, in that case, we know who owns the scene. We know it was Mason, because he's wishing. That's a thought. He's not saying out loud, boy, I wish I'd arrived earlier, because anybody could have heard that. Instead, he's thinking he wished he'd arrived earlier. So we know Mason is the person in front of the scene. Now, is the conference room was crowded a bad sentence? No. But isn't the next one better? It pulls you into a particular character. The readers want to be associated with. The way I usually put it, in face-to-face classes, it's like I want to put the coat of that character on and live within that character while I'm reading the book. Now, Not everybody does that, probably. But that's how I read a book. So me knowing that Mason squeezed into that last open chair and wished he'd arrived earlier tells me something about the character that I'm interested in, instead of the conference room was crowded and I'm imagining it in my head instead of imagining it his. Third thing is filter everything through that character as you're going. Filter it through what they're thinking, because that ends up with the point of view. Don't describe the world objectively, like you're standing back from it. This house was old. First off, don't use was if you can help it. Instead, describe it. The house sagged like it was exhausted from surviving 100 winters. That tells you what the person who is looking at it, your point of view character at that moment, is thinking about that house, because the second version belonged to somebody, whichever character you need it to belong to. Number 4, stay inside the point of view. So you want to have the access to that character's thoughts and memories and interpretations and observations and assumptions and reactions and all those different things. So if you start skipping to another character, we have to walk away from this character, whoever that is, and pull ourselves back together again, reorient ourselves with the character that's now thinking. So you don't have direct access to anybody else's mental state when you are in a point of view character. You can show another character's language, their behavior, their clues, but you can't show their thoughts unless you're in their point of view. So you just try to not announce it. You try not to have that. You try to have the character who is the point of view character looking at, seeing, hearing, smelling, whatever those senses are that we use, the other character, and making assumptions. And that's one of the cool things about this. When you're in a point of view character, you can have the point of view character misread someone else. And that makes it so cool because you can hide so much through that. That makes it really neat. So here's a head hopping. Susie's hands shook as she stepped onto the stage. Her point of view. Joe admired her courage because it's coming from his mind. She is no longer the point of view character. He is. Karen wondered whether Sarah would fail. So I'm sorry, Susie should be who's on there. So here we have 3 minds. They're all in the same paragraph, supposedly. It's not built up that way, but that's really where they are. And now we've got all of these different people that we're trying to find what they're thinking and how they all work together. So you get confusion. Here's a better way. Susie's hands shook as she stepped onto the stage. Joe's expression softened. She can see that. Maybe he wasn't judging her after all. She's thinking that. Karen sat rigidly in the front row. Susie can see that. But Susie couldn't tell whether it was support or skepticism, which is Susie's thought, one mind. Everything's filtered through Susie. Think about it this way. Books are told, point of view books, or through the books, are told on a dark stage. So we have your main character, in this case, Susie, standing on that stage, and out in the behind the audience is a spotlight. And that spotlight is shown onto Susie. And she has a mirror, because the only thing the audience can see is her through the spotlight and the mirror and how she turns it. So we don't know someone's creeping up behind her unless she does, because you're in her point of view. She can't know that person is back there unless they make a noise, they whatever they can do to get her attention, or she points the mirror at them. So you can hand the mirror to different people, and then she can step back into the darkness, or she can now be where the mirror is on her. But she can't show them without the spotlight being on them. It's filtered through her, and everything is in the story. So here's a POV editing checklist that you can do. Number 1, figure out who owns the scene. Number 2, what do they want? Number 3, what can they physically observe? Number four, what assumptions are they making? Again, based on their own assumptions. So that person over there makes a face at me. I have to determine whether that's a good face or a bad face, whether that person is angry at me or happy with me. And have I entered another character's thoughts? And if the answer is yes, then you can fix it simply by changing it around and making it happen. Okay, so here's a practice that you can do if you'd like to. Write a scene where Alice arrives at a high school reunion. She sees her former best friend and she sees her ex. Maybe the is holding on to her former best friend. So, version A of this would be that you only give us Alice's point of view. She is going to make assumptions through her filter based upon what she's seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, yada, yada, right? Smell, what's the other one? She sees that and she makes her assumption based on it. We're in her point of view. Now, if we have a version B, which is the former best friend's point of view only, then we're going to have an entirely different story. Now, can you have both? Yes, but separate them. Make sure the audience knows, the reader knows that you're going from Alice's point of view to the former best friend's point of view. So the former best friend is probably going to be smirking or well, I mean, we always have it that way, right? That this person is mean, and that the ex is probably smirking also. So the idea is now when you go to the former best friend's POV only, you can talk about how the former best friend thinks about Alice and whether she feels good about stealing the boyfriend. Well, the entire scene changes when that happens. So remember, who wants something? Who has the most to learn and to lose? Which reaction is most interesting? Because that's how you want. You want the person who has the most to lose and who is the most interesting to have POV. And stay there until the scene ends. Final takeaway. POV is two decisions: a global POV, who owns the story, and a scene POV, who owns the scene. And if you remember only one thing from this, choose your story owner, choose a scene owner, and stay loyal to both. One more thing, if you want to, I thought this was a really cool idea that I found. For every scene, write the POV character's name at the top, and you'll find your POV problems pretty quickly. All right. Well, thank you very much for listening. This will be up on the WITS blog for a couple weeks, and then we'll be taken down and it'll be moved to Lisa Norman's Academy, No Stress Academy, where you can look at it again. All right. Thank you.